So I wanted to talk a little bit about the coup that just took place in Niger and the Russia-Africa summit, really underscore the difference between Russia and the West. You know, politics, what is politics? Politics is about finding a common interest, right? Imperialism is about exploiting. Screw you, I'm going to take everything you have and I'm going to trample on you till the end of time. You are seeing in real time in Africa a pivot from the West, from Britain, France, the US, towards Russia. Now, how do all of these things intersect? I mean, very simply, you know, Russia does things by the book. They're straightforward with you. The Chinese are the same. Whereas Western countries have a history, you know, century after century after century of lying, cheating, stealing. And this is an unfortunate fact. So number one, let's start with the grain deal, right? The tagline was that Russia wants to starve children in Africa, and that's why Putin, you know, he just woke up and he decided to pull out of the grain deal. They don't actually tell you that, oh, it's the West who did not hold up their end of the deal. The grain deal was very clear that you have to allow both Russia and Ukraine, not only Ukraine, Russia and Ukraine, to export agricultural products. Russia was unable to because the West refused to lift sanctions. So now Putin at the Russia-Africa summit decides to gift a whole bunch of grain to Africa. Not only free of charge, but also free shipping, the whole bunch. So that not only shows you that there's no bad blood between the Russians and the African leaders and countries who attended the summit, but that this whole, you know, the entire saga surrounding the grain deal, the reporting is so dishonest. It's so boring and childish. And just this summit itself, the Russia-Africa summit, which took place yesterday, if you go read the horrible press that we have in England and in America, they think it was a failure because only 17 African leaders showed up, as opposed to 43 African leaders in 2019, right? It's like their brains are so dumb and primitive, they cannot grasp that politics moves outside of, you know, numbers. They're like counting the number of leaders on their fingers, like as if that's the only thing that matters. Number one, there's a war on, in case you haven't noticed. So, you know, by sending a leader there, it would appear to you know, it might make a country look like it's no longer neutral. And that's the stance that most of the world has, right? Most of the world is neutral in this conflict in Ukraine. So they might violate their neutral stance. And on top of that, the numbers of African leaders present has nothing to do with this, because if they cannot come, they still send a delegation. And things are moving on the African continent at such a scale and such a pace that these Western journalists, or, you know, they call themselves journalists, they are so petty and in denial. They just refuse to accept what is happening. They refuse to accept that Africa is done with Europe. They're done with all of it. Let me play you this clip, first of all, regarding the shipment of grain.
Мы будем готовы уже в ближайшие месяцы, в ближайшие 3-4 месяца безвозмездно предоставить Буркина-Фасо, Зимбабве, Мали, Сомали, Центральноафриканской Республике, Эритрее по 25-50 тысяч тонн зерна. Обеспечим и бесплатную доставку этой продукции потребителям. Наверное, будут интересны еще несколько цифр. Украина за прошлый сельскохозяйственный год произвела порядка 55 миллионов тонн зерновых. Экспорт составил 47 миллионов тонн. Немало. Из них 17 миллионов тонн пшеницы. А Россия, уважаемые коллеги, Россия собрала в прошлом году 156 миллионов тонн. 60 зерна. 60 миллионов тонн экспортировала. Из них 48 миллионов тонн – это пшеница. Доля России на мировом рынке пшеницы 20%. Украины менее 5%. а значит именно Россия вносит существенный вклад в глобальную продовольственную безопасность и является солидным, ответственным международным поставщиком сельхозпродукции. И те, кто утверждают, что это не так, что только на обеспечение вот этой так называемой зерновой сделки по вывозу украинского зерна, просто извращают факты, говорят неправду. Ну, собственно говоря, это на протяжении десятилетий, если не столетий, является практикой некоторых западных государств.
Говорить, I think, is to speak or tell. It's about the only word I could make out of the speech. But two notes before I proceed. The whole premise of why the grain deal must be implemented, right? Because they say Russia pulled out. Russia never pulled out. Russia is still in the grain deal as long as the other side hold up their end of the deal, because Russia's been holding up its end of the deal for a year now. They've had enough of waiting. If the grain deal is so important because it guarantees grain for poorer countries, then why did you block Russia from exporting its agricultural products? And Russia is more important for the supply of wheat and the supply of fertilizer. You know, this is a direct contradiction, because that's exactly what they did. That's why Russia stopped implementing the grain deal, because they didn't hold up their end of the deal. The UN was unable to convince the West to lift sanctions. So this proves they don't actually care about getting wheat to poorer countries. They were blocking it from going to poorer countries. Russia makes more contributions in wheat than anyone. Well, in this case, more than Ukraine, right? Because these are the two parties at hand. So why would you block the Russians from exporting if you really care about it getting to poorer countries? What hypocrisy. And on top of that, when it comes to this premise that Ukraine only sends grain to poor African countries, right? Like they like number one, they have nothing better to do than to wait around for the World Food Program to get a shipment from Odessa. Ukraine sent so much grain last year, okay, to Europe, not these poor countries that they talk about in the press, that they banned it. Ukraine's Eastern European neighbors, Poland, Hungary, and others, banned Ukrainian grain because they flooded the market with it. Do you understand what I'm saying? The Ukrainians put so much grain in Europe that the prices crashed, and it screwed over Polish farmers, Hungarian farmers, and they also complain that it's of lesser quality. Now, I'm not talking about the quality here. I'm just showing you that obviously this wheat is not going to poor countries. It's going to Europe. They have so much of it that they're just sending it there. The majority of it is going to rich countries. Okay, just so we can dispel that myth. Let me show you just another excerpt here.
Сделка была заключена ровно год назад, 22 июля 2022 года. Затем сделка эта, так называемая сделка, не раз продлевалась. Последний раз в мае текущего года, на период до 17 июля включительно. Мы вновь и вновь продлевали эту сделку. И продлевая, проявляли просто чудеса выдержки и терпения, толерантности. Рассчитывали, что наши зарубежные коллеги наконец начнут в полном объеме соблюдать согласованные и одобренные параметры и условия. Однако ничего подобного не происходило, никаких обязательств, договоренностей выполнять никто не собирался, а только постоянно требовали чего-то от России. Я считаю, что сотрудники ООН искренне стремились к выполнению всех данных Западом обязательств.
I agree with what he's saying. I also really believe that Guterres and all of the UN staff, because remember this is JCC mission. It's got a representative from Russia, from Ukraine, from Turkey, and from the UN, all working together in Turkey to get this thing working. I really believe the UN tried their best, but they couldn't get the West to budge.
Обещания, но так и не смогли ничего добиться. Ничего практически не сделали для нормальной работы сделки. А вот для ее срыва наши так называемые партнеры на Западе сил не пожалели. Сделали все, чтобы пустить ее под откос. А сегодня, как у нас в народе говорят, на голубом глазу практически лгут всему миру, говорят о том, что якобы Россия виновата в срыве этой сделки. Более того, чуть ли не во всех бедствиях населения африканских и ряда других стран винят Россию, которые сам Запад в свое время обобрал, столкнув в пучину войн, голода и нищеты. И продолжает сейчас в рамках своей неоколониальной системы грабить эти государства. Он и на зерновой сделке беззастенчиво наживался. Просто полностью извратил смысл этих договоренностей и суть.
I've put together some more interesting clips from the Russia-Africa summit that took place in St. Petersburg. Take a look.
These books, in many ways, the role of Russia and Africa in the fight against Nazism has been forgotten. But today we stand together, and today we're here to talk about the future of our countries and what will happen tomorrow in this new free world to which we aspire for, where there will be no meddling in our domestic affairs. We have shared prospects, and I hope that this summit will provide an opportunity to establish just peace and just world order and relations between our peoples.
Колонизация других стран, работорговля сегодня всеми признается как преступление. Это очевидно. Сегодня все с этим согласны. Но не были согласны, когда шла борьба за независимость в Африке. Не были. Это мы с вами хорошо помним. Вот это получение своего флага, как сказал только что коллега, недостаточно. И это очевидно. Вот сохранение монополии некоторых стран в области финансов, в области технологий, в области цифры, да, и в области продовольствия, вот это неприемлемо. С этим нужно бороться. И, конечно, вот многие здесь присутствующие знают, Советский Союз, Россия никогда не исходили из того, что нужно покупать в Африке только сырье. Сколько Советский Союз построил предприятий, электростанций, сталелитейных заводов в Африке. Мы должны вернуться к этой практике, как призвал сейчас коллега. Мы будем это делать и на двухсторонней основе, и на международных площадках.
They are printing money. They are not manufacturing anything at all. It's printing money. And this has been one of their weapons globally. The monetary system, the global monetary system, controlled by dollar and euro, has been used. Sanctions here, sanctions there, sanctions there, grabbing this account, grabbing that account, has been one of their tools. This is not going to continue indefinitely. And we need a new financial architecture globally, not controlled by euro, not controlled by the dollar, not controlled by other currencies.
You know, I find this so funny how in the press, and I swear this is, you'll see this in every outlet. They say now that, you know, Putin is trying to appeal to African leaders by pointing out the hypocrisy of the West and their colonial past. And that, you know, he's trying to put Russia on a pedestal and give it a higher moral standing. Yeah, it has a higher moral standing. What do you think? Like, you think Russia is comparable to what Britain and and Portugal and Spain and the Dutch and the Germans and the French did in Africa? What? Of course Russia has moral standing. These people are on crack. The people who are writing this are on crack. There's something wrong with them. They really think that Putin pointing out Western colonialism and Western hypocrisy is like an attempt to make Russia look good. No, it's not an attempt. It does make Russia look good. You have no one to blame but yourselves. Don't go looking at Putin. Putin's not the one who colonized Africa. Jesus Christ, like they really have the nerve to act like he's trying to hoodwink the African leaders like they're children or something, right? This is, again, the way, you see how they write in the press? It's, again, this neo-colonial shit. It's like African leaders, they don't understand that, you know, Russia's trying to fool them. China's trying to fool them, right? No, we would never do that. No, we would never do that. We're about human rights and democracy. oh, these African leaders are too immature. They don't understand what the Russians are trying to do. This is exactly how they write in the press. To this day, right now as I speak to you. They're trying to mock the Russia-Africa summit. You know why? Because the last Africa summit that the West ever held was the Berlin conference, the Congo conference, right? Which, admittedly Russia attended, but Russia in the end did not colonize Africa. This is a fact. You cannot compare Russia to the Dutch or to the UK or France. I'm sorry. I'm not even going to entertain this nonsense. This is rubbish. There is a ton of African blood on the hands of British banks. If you go to the city of London, which is like, I don't think, I know most of you guys are Americans, so you don't maybe appreciate the status that the city of London has. I don't mean like the city called London. The city of London is a district, like a borough, if you will, in New York. Yeah. Inside of London, that is Wall Street. It's British Wall Street, okay, and it has its own police force. So imagine if Wall Street had its own separate status as an entity and its own police force separate from the NYPD. That is how much control and power these institutions have. And every single bank, HSBC, the Bank of England, all of them traded or owned slaves and financed the slave trade in Britain and in Europe and the United States. Every single one. Let's go and talk about Niger. Niger is probably is the quintessential example of neo-colonialism. One of my best friends comes from Niger. Niger is a country that is famous for its uranium. When we talk about neo-colonialism, uranium ore is the number one issue here because France exploits Niger to this day. You can see here what Emmanuel Macron, the French president, had to say about the coup in Niger. So he's threatening sanctions now, and he doesn't seem to be too happy.
Je dirais ici avec beaucoup de clarté que la France condamne absolument, avec la plus grande fermeté, ce coup d'État militaire contre un dirigeant démocratiquement élu, courageux, et qui fait pour son pays les réformes et les investissements dont il a besoin, et que nous accompagnons comme nous avons accompagné son prédécesseur depuis le début. Ce coup d'État est parfaitement illégitime et profondément dangereux pour les Nigériens, pour le Niger et pour toute la région.
So maybe some of you have heard me talk about the CFA franc. The CFA franc is a currency that is minted in France, and 14 African countries still have this currency, which is mind-boggling. That France left, quote unquote, these countries, and yet it prints their money. How does that work? How can you give a country independence and yet you still govern its monetary policies? What kind of a contradiction is that? On top of that, Niger, because of its uranium ore, just to give you an idea how vital this is for the French, who have nuclear bombs and who also have, are huge proponents of nuclear energy. They about 70 to 75% of electricity in France, right? So EDF, which is Électricité de France, the state-owned company, about 70% of power in France is nuclear powered. Okay, so it is more than central to the French economy and day-to-day business. One third of French households are powered by uranium that comes from Niger. 1/3. So this is according to Oxfam, right? Which is a very famous British NGO. Okay, you might find a little bit of a little difference in terms of percentage, but the point remains the same. Whether it's 33% or 34% does not change a single syllable of what I am communicating to you, which is that France depends and needs uranium ore from Niger to power its country. And it exploits Niger to such a level that it is beyond theft and colonialism. It's something else. It's something else, right? It's like, to this day, this company here, Areva, is is keeping all of its business dealings with Niger secret. So the contracts that it negotiates with the government in Niger are secret. Okay, so we don't know actually how much it pays Niger. And on top of that, this area is the business district. It's called La Défense in Paris. Okay, so again, sort of like the Wall Street. Okay, in of Paris. The tallest building here is Areva. This is the nuclear company that extracts uranium in Niger. They have the biggest building in the French in Paris business district. Let that speak for itself and let that sink in. Now there's a coup. There's a coup all of a sudden. Let me play you the clip where they announced the coup.
26 juillet 2023, nous, forces de défense et de sécurité, réunis au sein du Conseil national pour la sauvegarde de la patrie, CNSP, avons décidé de mettre fin au régime que vous connaissez. Cela fait suite à la dégradation continue de la situation sécuritaire, la mauvaise gouvernance économique et sociale. Les frontières terrestres et aériennes sont fermées jusqu'à la stabilisation de la situation.
Just to be clear, they got rid of the president who is pro-France and pro-US. Okay? So, here, I'll read you this part from his name is Bazoum, by the way, right? The Mohamed Bazoum. Let me read you this excerpt from the BBC. So they say that former colonial power France and the US have military bases in the uranium-rich country, and both were quick to condemn the coup. Oh, I'm sure they were. I'm sure they were. There are concerns that Niger's new leadership could move away from its Western allies and closer to Russia. If it does, it would follow the path of two of its neighbors, Burkina Faso and Mali, which have both pivoted towards Moscow since recent military coups of their own. Oh no! Heaven pray, I wonder why they would ever do such a thing. They had been under intense pressure from Islamist groups which operated freely across much of both countries. Let me translate these 4 lines. When the BBC or Mr. Blinken, or Monsieur Macron say that you guys need us, to help you fight these Islamist groups. What they're saying is that you need to pay for protection, right? The United States and France destroyed Libya. What happened after Libya? In the Sahel region, which is right where sub-Saharan Africa begins. All of a sudden, for some reason, after a Western engineered power coup in Libya, you have terrorist groups who start springing up. Oh, who could have seen that coming? It's not like it already happened in Iraq and then in Syria. Oh, it just keeps happening by coincidence. Now these groups are in the Sahel region. It's a problem in Niger. It's a problem in Mali. Now you have to have UN peacekeeping missions, and of course, more importantly, the UN peacekeeping missions are not the issue. It's the US and French bases. These are independent of the UN missions. Do you understand? The United States and France create a problem, and then they present themselves as the saviors, right? Because now they get to justify their military presence. Where? Here we go again, in Arabia and Africa. Where all the diamonds and gold and oil in the world seem to be. Wow. It's like nothing changed from 100 years ago, right? Same crap. So this is yellow cake, right? You remember they said Saddam Hussein is going to Niger and buying yellow cake? Dave Chappelle did great sketch on this with Black Bush. This is from Oxfam. In France, 1 out of every 3 light bulbs is lit thanks to Nigerian uranium. In Niger, nearly 90% of the population has no access to electricity. This situation cannot continue. France must prove that the time for secret agreements, closed negotiations, and pressures is over. African countries should be able to count on fair revenues from French companies extracting the resources. Do you know how old this thing is that I'm reading to you? This is from 2013. And you can go and find the same press release from a decade before, and a decade before, and a decade before, and you can go back all the way to the 1960s. Nothing changed. France is plundering Niger as we speak, right now in 2023. Nothing has changed. This is what you call neo-colonialism. 80% of people in Niger, Oxfam here said 90%, Doesn't matter. The point is, most people in Niger do not have an electricity grid. They don't even have electricity. Meanwhile, the Eiffel Tower, the Eiffel Tower is lit by uranium that comes from Niger. 80%, the overwhelming majority of exports from Niger are uranium. And yet it only accounts for 5 to 10% of revenue, for government revenue. How is this possible? This resource, which the French, do everything possible to maintain control over, secret contracts, military bases, just neo-colonial policies over and over, decade after the next, right? Century after the next. They need it so badly, and yet Niger seemed to make no money from it. On top of no electricity grid, Niger, if you look at the Human Development Index, right? Which is the ranking of how poor countries are, essentially. Niger is usually the second poorest on the list, right? You'll find it at 187 or 188 out of 189. Do you think this is a coincidence that, Central African Republic and Niger and Congo and Chad and all these countries that are former French and British colonies, they just happen to be the poorest countries in the world? They have the most valuable resources on the face of this planet, and yet they have no money. How is this possible? Colonialism, theft, stealing. That is how this is possible. Russia doesn't work this way. Russia does not have a colonial history inside of Africa the same way the British and the French and the Portuguese and the Spanish and the Dutch and blah, blah, blah have. They just don't, right? This is why yesterday, as this coup is taking place in Niger, where they're kicking out this pro-Western leader, look at what people on their own are coming up and saying outside of the party headquarters, where which was burnt down. Look what they're holding. Look at the signs that they're holding. This sign on the right says "Abat la France," down with France. And let me translate for you. He's saying, "Long live Russia, and France, leave us alone. Leave us alone, France. Long live Russia." Look, you see the Russian flag up there? Under the Nigerian flag.
We have uranium, we have diamonds, we have gold, we have oil, and we live like slaves? Why should we? Until when? We can't accept it. The French base in Niger must leave. We don't need the French to keep us safe.
We're not against young people raising the Russian flag. It's because they've seen how certain countries in the region are cooperating with Russia, thinking that there's equal treatment, and that's why they've brought out these flags.
I hope this doesn't need explaining for most of you. I'm sure you already know, but Nigeria and Niger are two different countries, in case this wasn't abundantly clear. Just so we get that straight. Just my point here, look at how protesters and regular people outside are bringing Russian flags. Why are they bringing Russian flags? This shows you that Russia, which has no particular ties with Niger whatsoever. Yes, Russia has ties, good relations with Sudan, right? Russia's cool with Hemeti, right? Dagalo and Burhan. And then, of course, once Russia went and got permission from both of them, they're now fighting each other, Hemeti and Burhan. But once Russia got permission to build a military base, a naval base on the Red Sea, which is, very, clearly strategic, all of a sudden it descends into chaos, right? The reason that this benefits America, whether directly or indirectly, it does benefit America, is because it was contingent. The construction of a Russian naval base on the Red Sea was contingent upon the formation of a civilian government. Now that you have Hemeti and Burhan fighting each other, this is going to be postponed another 4 years. Who the hell knows? They've already been in deadlock negotiations for 4 years now. So my point here, though, is that regardless, Russia's cool with Sudan. Okay, they're also very, very heavily involved in the extraction and in the mining and the sale of gold in Sudan. Sudan is experiencing a gold rush right now. They have Wagner troops also in Mali, in the Central African Republic. And the reason African countries are getting help from China and getting help from Russia is not because CNN and the BBC want you to think that, oh, Russia and China are tricking them and debt trapping them, quote unquote, right? Like the BBC and CNN and all these Western outlets, they speak about African leaders like they're stupid, like they're children or something. Like they don't know what's good for them. They need the white European, the white American to come tell them what's good for them. Well, what did that get them? How long has France been in Africa, in the Sahel? Have they dealt with the Islamist threat that the BBC mentioned? Have the Americans dealt with this threat? America and France are the very reason this problem exists. Never mind the neo-colonial problem with the theft of resources, which I just explained. I know you guys already know this, but Al-Qaeda as well. This goes back to the 80s. The CIA funded Al-Qaeda, and it helped create Al-Qaeda and especially Al-Qaeda and the Taliban out of the Mujahideen, which they financed and funded and trained in the Cold War. These are all problems of America's making. This is historical fact. You don't need me to tell you this, but I am here to say it because no one else will. The BBC and CNN want to lie. They want to act like America and France and Britain are the military and political and economic saviors of Africa. No, they're not. This is why Wagner is present in Africa, because African countries are soliciting their services, because these European and Western countries can't get the job done. They're incompetent or unwilling, or both. One funny thing I read was that clearly the presence of Wagner is pointless and ineffective. Why? Because now that Wagner has been deployed inside these countries like the Central African Republic or Mali, the attacks from Islamist groups have risen. Yeah, they've risen because Wagner are doing their job. When they're actually attacking these terrorist groups, they're retaliating against the country. The reason you don't have those attacks when the Americans are around is because the Americans are letting them be. Do you understand? The Americans, like we explained, as I was telling you guys when we looked at Syria, everywhere you find ISIS, they kill an ISIS leader, guess who's there? It's an area occupied by Turkey, a NATO country, or the United States, another NATO country, right? What a coincidence. And Israel, which openly admitted to helping Al-Qaeda in Syria. Hand in glove, right? These groups, whether it's Al-Qaeda or we're talking about ISIS, whether it's in Middle East or it's in Africa, they go hand in glove with Israel, with the West, and as I said, Libya. I mean, Libya's descended into chaos. I mean, it looks nothing like how it was under Gaddafi. And now, a lot of people end up drowning in the Mediterranean because they're trying to escape neo-colonialism. They're trying to escape economic situations that are so horrible. Who created these economic situations? It's the West. I'm sorry, but this is the truth. Any self-respecting person, especially if you're British and or from one of these colonial countries, you will admit that. You have to admit that. It's your duty. It's your duty to admit that. People at the BBC don't want to admit that. They think it's Putin who's doing propaganda. No, it's not propaganda. This is history. Shame on you. This is why people fly Russian flags when they have a coup in Niger, because for them, they're rejecting a president who is pro-French and pro-American. They're rejecting the neo-colonial shackles that the West has put on them. And yes, of course, they're going to turn to the next big thing, or rather the opponent, the competitor. The Russians. If it's like in Syria, if you don't want the Russians or Iran coming into Syria, not that it's any of your business, but if you don't want them, establishing a stronger foothold or more influence or growing their presence, right? Then why did you screw with the country? The Russians and Iranians and Hezbollah are called into Syria to clean up your mess. And now African countries have to call in Wagner to clean up NATO's mess. It's really not that difficult to understand. They just don't want you to understand. Let me play you. This is Julius Malema, okay, economic freedom fighters from South Africa. Listen to what he has to say.
They don't have borders in Europe. But when it comes to us, they say, no, you must have borders.
Before I continue, when he says they don't have borders in Europe, he is not repeating this ridiculous trope that, you know, you hear right-wing morons in America or Europe say that, oh my God, there are no borders in Europe and all these migrants are coming in. Well, I was literally just saying that what you call economic migrants, they're people fleeing Western imperialism. The poverty in Africa is Europe's doing. Europe did that. Europe plundered Africa. Europe is plundering Africa. I was literally telling you Niger is being plundered. What he's talking about is, for example, Schengen. You know, Schengen zone is in Central Europe. You can travel without a visa. There's free circulation of people. That's something completely different. He's talking about the fact that you have a European Union with free circulation of goods, money, and people, where you're able to travel from one end of the continent to the other unhindered, right? Why doesn't Arabia have that? Why doesn't Africa have that? He's referring to Pan-Africanism and Pan-Arabism. But we all know why these borders here, this patchwork, not just here, but also in the Middle East, came into being. It's because Europeans are afraid of competition. They don't want united Africa, and they don't want united Arabia. That's why.
Why? The division of of Africa is what makes them thrive. They thrive on the division of the African continent. Can you imagine the minerals of DRC combined with the minerals of South Africa and with a new currency based on the minerals? What we can do to the dollar if we become a United States of Africa with our minerals alone? We can collapse the dollar. We can collapse the strong pound that is based on gold, yet they don't have a gold mine. So why do you allow such things? There were no borders, and we must all of us unite in that call. Yeah. Free movements of peasants, free movements of goods will make this country flourish.
He nailed it, right? And when he mentions a currency backed by minerals, this is why we go back to Libya. Gaddafi tried doing this. They killed him. Once again, the proof is not just in the theory, but the evidence, the emails show this, right? Between Blumenthal and between Hillary Clinton, right? So she was then the Secretary of State and her advisor, and you could see in the emails they're talking about Gaddafi has 144 tons of gold, and he wants to use that gold to create an African currency, and the French are really worried. Why would France be worried about that? What have they got to do with Libya? No. It's not about Libya. It's about the other currency that I told you about, the CFA franc, which they have in 14 East African countries, West African countries. You know, they use this because they need to control Africa. They still have this currency to this day. So if you come and replace the CFA franc with an African golden dinar, which is backed by African minerals and used to denominate sales of African minerals, you would collapse the dollar. Yes, you would. And you would collapse the euro, and you would get rid of this crappy CFA franc nonsense that they've imposed on Africa. That's what would happen. And that's why they killed Gaddafi, because these ideas are too big. You're not allowed to have economic independence. We come kill you. Remember, I'm not going to play this now because we already watched it, but you remember, you'll find it on the channel here, the Namibian president who was really giving it to Norbert Lammert, right? So he was the speaker of the Bundestag, right? And he really gave it to him about the Chinese, because he was basically telling him, like, what problem is it of yours how many Chinese we have here? Mind your own business, right? You see this constant, like, envy, this jealousy, this insecurity from Europeans and Americans about how Russia and China are growing in influence in Africa, because they're doing it differently. They just are. China and Russia negotiate, and they find an agreement, and that's how they do something, is with respect. As I said, what did I say at the beginning of this video? Politics is mutual interest. It's finding common ground, mutual interest. The West doesn't do that. The West is like, screw you, we're taking your shit. There's no mutual nothing. It's screw you. From the Romans until the Americans. Same thing, right? Although the Romans actually left something behind, right? At least that. But you understand my point. The African countries that make deals with China and Russia, it's their business. You know, who are we to tell them any better, or to lecture them in any capacity? Funny thing is, another symptom of this rejection, this unshackling of French and Western colonialism. Guess what happened? There's the Brics summit taking place next month in South Africa, in Johannesburg, and Emmanuel Macron, the French president, asked to be invited last month, and he told him no. So they invited 70 countries. This is from El Mayadeen. They invited 70 nations, but no to the French, no to the British, and no to the Americans. I can't say I blame them. The whole point of Brics, let me be clear. Brics is not about we're going to create like an anti-Western alliance or something. No, not at all. Brics and the New Silk Road and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, it's about, as I said, mutual interest, working on projects that benefit each other. The West, we are welcome. We are welcome to join the Chinese and join the rest of the world, frankly. It's not a Chinese thing. But we are welcome to join the Brics as long as we are sincere. From our behavior, from our past, they do not judge us to be sincere. They judge us in Africa, in Brazil, in Russia, in India, in China. They judge us to be jealous and thieves. I mean, our leaders are, in any case. Our so-called leaders, they definitely are. I don't think most people are like that, But we have to shed that colonial past and be better. This is Gaddafi, by the way. I was mentioning him just earlier, right? They got rid of him because he was, one of these officers, young Arab officers, had a coup, and what did he rebel against? These monarchies that were installed by the West at the end of World War II during this decolonization. There wasn't decolonization. Decolonization never happened. That's a myth that they sell you. The only real decolonization happened in countries like Libya, like Egypt, well, when Nasser was there, or like Syria, or like Iran. These countries really rejected the Western installed leaders, whether it's the Shah, or as I said, with Gaddafi, he rebelled against the king and got rid of that system and installed, one that was actually supported by most Libyans until NATO got rid of him. These are real processes of decolonization. And when you actually try to embark on down this road, they will kill you, unfortunately. Doesn't mean he's perfect, but he was certainly better than what they're proposing. Much better than what they're proposing. Let me show you this short clip from Mrs. Pandor, or Miss Pandor, who's the foreign minister of South Africa. I like her a great deal. Listen to what she had to say.
I think this notion of international rules is very comfortable for some people to use when it suits them. But they don't believe in international rules when it doesn't suit them, because they don't apply international rules or law equally in all circumstances. So you can't say because Ukraine has been invaded that suddenly sovereignty is important, but it was never important for Palestine. It's very peculiar. If you believe in international law truly, then wherever sovereignty is infringed, it must apply. And this is the point we've been making, that we use the framework of international law unequally, depending on who is affected. And we are arguing that that must change. And one of the interesting changes that has occurred is the sudden movement, because Russia has invaded Ukraine, that we say, okay, let's not allow the Security Council to just have the veto and let it pass. We take it to the General Assembly. When some of us had been calling for the General Assembly to have a greater say, we never enjoyed support. But suddenly today, see, that's where international law begins to mean nothing. Because for some, we see it as a cheating, and for others, we see it as a benefit. So our argument is, let's revise the international multilateral system to ensure that we observe that post-1948 has arrived.
I like her very much. She's on point. And, she really points out the hypocrisy. This is the problem with the veto system, with the UN Security Council, is that, just by default, by definition, you have some countries that are on a more equal footing than other countries, and who can, and that includes China and Russia. That is the problem. And when it comes to the Palestinian issue, I mean, the Palestinians don't even have member status at the UN. They're an observer. How? Come on. This is unacceptable. Absolutely unacceptable. And this is something that's going to need to change. Before I continue, one thing that made me laugh. Do you remember last month when on the left, that's the U.S. ambassador to South Africa, he made up this nonsense that South Africa had allowed a Russian ship to dock at one of its ports, and that this was loaded up with weapons and then head for Ukraine. And the next day she called him in for a démarche, and she just gave him a good spanking and dressed him down, and then he quickly apologized and withdrew his comments. You can see the look she's giving him. It's like, are you for real? Amazing. But what she was saying, I mean, this is it's very hard now to say anything against the Russians, because in 2003 the UN said no, you cannot go into Iraq, and then many countries did it, right? The French didn't, but the UK and the US did, and they gave the finger to the UN. And this is another body. Among all the issues that we just talked about, when it comes to neo-colonialism, the UN has failed to deliver on its promise of, establishing peace, not because, its intentions are bad, but because it's been corrupted by some countries, by our countries, and it needs to be reformed in some ways, as she pointed out, that you don't just have the UN Security Council running things, and especially not with veto power and permanent seats for some countries, but not for others. It's not enough that you have, a rotation of 10 countries every cycle. This is not good enough. Even when there's something favorable that happens, let me give you an example with 242, the Americans let this pass because even they couldn't defend this, right? And Israel had just recently attacked the USS Liberty, right? In the 6-Day War. So the resolution was that Israel has to withdraw. That Security Council resolution has been there for decades, and it's never been implemented. So even if you were to leave everything up to the UN Security Council, there's no way to even implement the goddamn things, because Israel just ignores them. The United States just ignores the UN when it doesn't say something it likes. Let's just conclude here by saying that there is a definite pivot in terms of attitude in African countries. There is a reason why Niger today, and why Burkina Faso, and why Mali all kicked out French troops. Well, Niger is about to, I promise you. They're about to kick out the French troops as well. Actually, the French troops in Mali and Burkina Faso had to run away into Niger because they were kicked out. These countries have all had coups now in recent history because there is a rejection of neo-colonialism. Remember, Niger got its independence in 1960, and now in the last decades it's become apparent this was not real independence. The uranium plundering by France is one aspect of this. Another shackle, which I explained to you, the CFA franc, which is in 14 present in 14 other African countries. Now a lot of the countries in the world, not just in Africa, but a lot of the countries in the world, including those who have signed up on the Belt and Road Initiative and Brics, are understanding the era of decolonization never happened. And so the only pathway forward is to have, a real currency backed by minerals, like Gaddafi wanted. To have something like the UN, but really like the UN, as it was meant to be and as it was envisioned. Dismantling Bretton Woods and the U.S. U.S. monopoly over global reserve currencies, over oil sales, over the entire financial and monetary system that was put into place in 1945, and actually having something more equal, that does not allow sanctions, one country to just whip others with its currency and destroy them and lay siege to them when it pleases, and to do things based on mutual respect. Okay, like I said, I really don't give a crap if you like the Russians or you don't like the Chinese or you like the Chinese monopoly. I really don't care. There is a clear, distinct difference in how those two countries do politics versus the rest of the countries in Western Europe and the United States. There just is. This is a fact. And their history with Africa is a testament to that. And you are seeing that being played out again now as I'm speaking to you. There's a reason why they're kicking out France and the United States from these countries and pivoting towards China and Russia. There's a reason for that. Wake up and smell the coffee.